The grand, imposing brownstone in the affluent suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, stood as a silent testament to a life meticulously ordered, rigidly disciplined, and profoundly solitary. Its polished mahogany doors and meticulously manicured gardens spoke of old money and an unwavering adherence to tradition. Within its hallowed, almost sterile, interiors resided Judge Alistair Thorne, a figure as unyielding and precise as the legal tomes that lined his vast study. He was a celebrated jurist, renowned throughout the state for his unwavering commitment to the letter of the law, his rulings as sharp and unforgiving as the gavel he wielded. His courtroom was a theater of strict justice, where mercy, though acknowledged, rarely swayed the undeniable weight of evidence. Yet, beyond the polished veneer of his professional life, Judge Thorne's personal world was an echoing chamber of profound loss. Years ago, a tragedy had shattered his carefully constructed existence, the mysterious death of his only daughter, Amelia, followed by the bewildering disappearance of her infant son, his grandson, whom he had never even had the chance to meet. The police investigation had yielded no answers, only a gaping void in his life. He had retreated into his work, burying his grief beneath mountains of legal precedent and a rigid adherence to procedure. Justice, he believed, was the only true solace in a chaotic world, and he administered it with an almost religious fervor, as if in doing so, he could somehow bring order to his own shattered past. His evenings were a poignant tableau of this self-imposed isolation. He would sit alone at the head of a vast, ornate dining table in his formal dining room, the crystal chandelier above casting cold, shimmering reflections on the gleaming silver cutlery. The silence of the room was absolute, broken only by the faint clinking of his fork against the fine porcelain or the distant tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. His gaze, often distant and melancholic, would frequently settle upon a small, faded photograph of his daughter, Amelia, placed discreetly on a side table. Her bright, hopeful smile, frozen in time, was a constant, aching reminder of the void she had left behind. The pain was an old companion, a dull ache that never truly subsided. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Judge Thorne drove his sedate sedan through the tree-lined streets of his neighborhood, heading home from a particularly draining day at court, he witnessed a jarring scene. A young, inexperienced driver, distracted by his phone, swerved erratically, T-boning a smaller sedan at a busy intersection. The screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal filled the air, followed by the cries of the injured. Many onlookers froze, unsure of what to do. The young driver, terrified, stumbled out of his car, stammering incoherent apologies. Despite his advanced years and the emotional exhaustion of his day, Judge Thorne reacted with the precision of a trained legal mind. He immediately pulled over, activated his hazard lights, and strode towards the wreckage. He wasn't a first responder, but his presence exuded an immediate authority. He quickly assessed the situation, identifying the injured, and without hesitation, began to calmly direct the confused bystanders. Someone call 911, report multiple injuries, do not move the victims. Secure the scene. He then turned to the distraught young driver, his voice firm but surprisingly devoid of judgment. Young man, move your vehicle to the shoulder, turn off your engine, and please, gather your insurance and registration. This is a clear case of reckless driving. He remained at the scene until the paramedics and police arrived, meticulously documenting details, ensuring that witness statements were taken accurately, and even discreetly advising the injured parties on their rights. He made sure the young driver, though clearly at fault, was treated fairly but held accountable. The police officers, recognizing the esteemed Judge Thorne, were surprised and impressed by his direct intervention. "Thank you, Judge," one officer said. "You saved us a lot of trouble, and probably helped those folks get what they deserve." The victims, shaken but grateful, offered their tearful thanks. Elias didn't seek gratitude. He simply saw a breach of order, a moment where justice needed a guiding hand, and he provided it. This act, witnessed by a few police officers and grateful victims, was a save-the-cat moment that showcased his inherent desire for fairness and order. Even when he believed himself to be a detached dispenser of justice, it revealed a deeper layer of his character, a quiet compassion beneath his rigid exterior. Elias often carried a small, tarnished pocket watch, a relic from a bygone era. Its silver casing was smooth with age, and etched almost imperceptibly on its back were three elegant, intertwined initials, A.V.T., Amelia Vance Thorne, and a date, September 12, 1999, his daughter's birthday, a year before her death and his grandson's disappearance. He would often unconsciously rub its cool, worn surface with his thumb when he was deep in thought, or when presiding over a particularly perplexing case in court. This pocket watch was more than just a nostalgic trinket. It was a profound link to a happier past, a tangible symbol of the family he had lost, a quiet ache in his heart. Sometimes, in the solitude of his study, he would find himself gazing at an old, leather-bound journal, his daughter Amelia's. Tucked within its pages was an unfinished pencil sketch of a child's face. It was a rough draft, but the eyes, large and questioning, held a flicker of recognition for Elias, a haunting familiarity that he couldn't quite place. He had often wondered whose face it was, perhaps a friend of Amelia's, or a child she admired. He never suspected it was a nascent portrait of his own lost grandson, a silent seed of mystery waiting to be watered by destiny. The sketch was a poignant reminder of the life that had been violently ripped from him, a clue to a familial connection he was utterly unaware of. This hidden detail hinted at a deeper, personal connection to the seemingly random tragedy that had shaped his rigid adherence to the law, unbeknownst to anyone, including himself. His life, outwardly austere and predictable, was nonetheless haunted by these unspoken shadows. He buried himself in legal precedents, in the cold, unyielding logic of the courtroom, seeking to impose order on a world that felt fundamentally chaotic. He believed in the absolute truth of evidence, the undeniable weight of proof. Emotions, he had long ago learned, were unreliable, dangerous things that clouded judgment. He was a man of the law, and the law was his only solace, his only family. But even as he rendered his stern verdicts, a part of him, a part he rarely acknowledged, yearned for connection, for the missing pieces of his shattered life. The quiet before the storm was still, but the winds of fate were already beginning to stir, preparing to unleash a truth that would shake the very foundations of his ordered world. Boston, a city steeped in history, was grappling with a modern scourge, a terrifying surge in youth crime. The headlines screamed of escalating violence, particularly a disturbing wave of organized robberies targeting high-end establishments. Public outcry was deafening, amplified by breathless media coverage. Citizens demanded immediate action, harsher penalties, and a firm hand to restore order. In the hallowed halls of justice, the pressure mounted, particularly on judges. They were expected to deliver not just verdicts, but exemplary sentences, harsh punishments designed to send an unambiguous message to potential offenders. It was into this charged atmosphere that Judge Alistair Thorne was thrust into a case that would challenge the very foundations of his unwavering legal philosophy. The crime itself was audacious, a brazen robbery at the Gilded Relic, a prestigious antique store nestled in Boston's historic Beacon Hill. The perpetrator, swiftly apprehended due to a tipped-off informant, was identified as Ethan Vance, a volatile, defiant young man barely out of his teens, already saddled with a string of minor priors. The incident shocked the city, igniting further public demand for swift and severe justice. Judge Thorne, with his reputation for unyielding adherence to the law and his stern sentencing, was the natural choice to preside over the case. This wasn't merely another case for him. It struck at the core of his belief in justice, forcing him to confront the human element behind the cold facts. As Judge Thorne reviewed Ethan's file in the quiet solitude of his chambers, a strange, unsettling feeling began to stir within him. Ethan's mugshot, with its defiant eyes and stubborn jawline, held a peculiar familiarity. The name, Vance, though common, also snagged at something deep in his memory, He felt a profound, almost paternal pull of curiosity towards the young offender, an inexplicable resonance that transcended the usual detached objectivity of his profession. He found himself poring over every detail of Ethan's meager personal history, his transient childhood, his lack of stable family, the vague mentions of foster care. There was a raw, untamed quality about the boy that reminded him, hauntingly, of his own daughter, Amelia, in her rebellious youth. This personal, emotional connection to the case was deeply unsettling for a man who had long prided himself on his unwavering impartiality. This burgeoning curiosity clashed violently with the immense pressure from society and his own reputation for delivering maximum sentences. He was Judge Thorne, the unyielding. The public expected a harsh punishment, a deterrent. His colleagues, too, anticipated a swift, no-nonsense verdict that would reinforce the rule of law. The thought of being perceived as soft, of showing any deviation from his established judicial persona, filled him with a quiet dread. He had meticulously built his reputation on unwavering discipline, on the belief that strict adherence to the law was the only path to true justice. But the unsettling feeling, the strange sense of connection to Ethan, persisted. He wrestled with his conscience, torn between the professional expectation to condemn and a deep, almost instinctual urge to understand, to uncover the hidden truths behind the young man's troubled facade. This crisis, personal and profound, was awakening a long-dormant paternal instinct, rekindling a desire for a deeper, more empathetic justice than he had practiced in years. The point of no return arrived during the preliminary hearing. Ethan Vance, slumped in the defendant's chair, displayed a defiant swagger that bordered on outright contempt. When given the chance to address the court, he didn't offer remorse or an apology. Instead, he stared directly at Judge Thorne, his young eyes blazing with a raw, almost arrogant challenge. "You don't know anything about me, old man," Ethan sneered, his voice cutting through the hushed courtroom. "You sit up there in your fancy robes, judging people you don't understand. You think you know justice. You've never lived a day in my shoes. You don't know what it's like to have nothing, to be nobody. Your laws don't mean anything out there, not where I come from." The words, laced with such direct insolence, sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Lawyers gasped, bailiffs stiffened, and the public gallery murmured with outrage. Judge Thorne, usually impassive, felt a sharp, unexpected pang of anger, quickly followed by a chilling sense of familiarity. The defiance, the raw pain masked by arrogance. It was a mirror image of his daughter, Amelia, in her most rebellious teenage years. Ethan's challenge, though disrespectful, pierced through Judge Thorne's professional detachment, striking at a deeper personal chord. It was a direct affront to his authority. But more than that, it was a desperate cry from a lost soul, a cry that resonated with his own unspoken grief. From that moment, Judge Thorne knew. He couldn't simply proceed with the usual motions. He couldn't allow this case to be just another statistic, another cold judgment. Ethan's words, his defiant stare, had unwittingly awakened a long-dormant part of Judge Thorne, the grieving father, the grandfather who had lost everything. He realized that this was more than just a robbery case. It was a mystery, a personal enigma that demanded a deeper, more human investigation. He would face this challenge head-on, delve into the depths of Ethan's past, and uncover the truth, whatever it might be. There was no going back to his comfortable routine of detached justice. The case had become deeply, profoundly personal. Judge Alistair Thorne sat in his chambers, the echoes of Ethan Vance's defiant words still reverberating in the quiet space. The young man's insolence, his raw challenge to the judge's authority, had stung, yet it had also ignited a spark of profound, unsettling recognition. You don't know what it's like to have nothing, to be nobody. Ethan's eyes, blazing with a mix of anger and desperate pain, mirrored a look Elias had seen only once before in his own daughter, Amelia. during her most rebellious, misunderstood years. Despite the professional imperative to maintain a cold distance, the judge felt an inexplicable, almost paternal connection to the defiant youth. He began to meticulously delve into Ethan's file, not with his usual dispassionate legal eye, but with a forensic intensity driven by a burgeoning personal curiosity. He sought inconsistencies, anomalies, anything that might explain the unsettling familiarity he felt. The file painted a bleak picture, a childhood fractured by unstable foster homes, a string of petty offenses, and a pervasive lack of any positive adult influence. There were gaps, too, frustrating lacunae in the official records, particularly concerning Ethan's earliest years. He noted the recurring surname Vance in Ethan's various records, though it was a common enough name not to immediately trigger a direct link to his own daughter's married name, Thorne Vance. He clung to the cold facts, the legal documents, desperately trying to impose order on the chaos of his own burgeoning suspicion. Meanwhile, Sarah Miller, Ethan's public defender, a young lawyer brimming with idealistic fervor and a fierce dedication to her often overlooked clients, watched Judge Thorne with a growing sense of bewilderment. She knew the judge's reputation unyielding, a stickler for the rules, famous for his maximum sentences. Yet, she noticed subtle shifts in his demeanor during Ethan's preliminary hearings. The way his gaze lingered on Ethan, the almost imperceptible pause before he delivered a ruling, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. She'd also noted the judge's unusually detailed questions regarding Ethan's early childhood and his foster care history. Sarah, with her innate empathy for marginalized youth, instinctively understood that Ethan was more than just another criminal, and she began to suspect that Judge Thorne, for reasons unknown, saw something similar. She started her own quiet investigation into Ethan's background, hoping to uncover mitigating circumstances that might sway the formidable judge. Sarah, perceptive and compassionate, was quietly becoming Elias's first true helper. The unveiling, a revelation triggered not by conscious intent, but by desperate improvisation, occurred during a tense day of testimony. The prosecutor, Mr. Richard Hayes, a formidable and ambitious man, known for his aggressive tactics and a pristine conviction rate, was building an ironclad case against Ethan. He presented damning forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and Ethan's own prior record, painting a picture of a hardened young criminal. The atmosphere in the courtroom was grim, the outcome seemingly inevitable. Then, during cross-examination, pushed to the brink by Hayes's relentless badgering, Ethan suddenly blurted out a detail unprompted, a raw, unfiltered fragment of his past. He wasn't trying to confess or boast. He was lashing out, fueled by anger and a sense of profound injustice. "You don't get it," Ethan yelled, his voice raw. "You think I just chose this life I was left in a basket on the steps of St. Jude's orphanage when I was barely a year old, with nothing but a faded, torn blanket and a broken, silver locket with some stupid initial on it." He clenched his fist. Some life. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Defense lawyers, including Sarah Miller, exchanged surprised glances. This detail had never been in any of Ethan's previous statements or police reports. It was a raw, impulsive outburst. Judge Thorne, however, froze. His face, usually a mask of stoic impartiality, paled almost imperceptibly. A broken, silver locket. St. Jude's orphanage. The word struck him like a physical blow, a chilling echo from his own past. He instinctively reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the cool, smooth surface of his own tarnished pocket watch. Its inscription, A.V.T., swirled in his mind. Amelia Vance Thorne, his daughter. She had often visited St. Jude's, volunteering there in her youth. And the locket. Amelia had owned a similar silver locket, a family heirloom, given to her by his late wife. It had been missing since the day Amelia disappeared. This was the core of the unveiling, a moment of profound, almost unbearable personal connection. Elias hadn't sought it. It had erupted from the raw pain of the defendant. He looked at Ethan, then back at his internal memory, the pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to click into place. The defiance in Ethan's eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw, the raw vulnerability masked by anger. It was all Amelia. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic rhythm that threatened to shatter his composure. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was too specific, too intimately tied to his own deepest wound. The witnessing of this initial revelation was selective but profoundly impactful. Only Judge Thorne and Sarah Miller truly grasped the devastating significance of Ethan's outburst. Sarah, watching the judge's reaction, saw the rare flicker of profound emotion cross his face. She saw him clutch at his pocket. Her own investigative instincts, honed by years of uncovering hidden truths for her vulnerable clients, immediately sprang to life. A broken locket, an orphanage, a missing child. She knew the judge had lost his daughter and grandson years ago. A terrifying, yet hopeful possibility began to form in her mind. The antagonist, prosecutor Richard Hayes, however, saw none of this. He merely saw an uncooperative defendant's emotional outburst, a tactical misstep designed to elicit sympathy. He seized the opportunity to portray Ethan as manipulative and untrustworthy. His sharp eyes had noticed Judge Thorne's momentary flicker of emotion, but he misinterpreted it as personal annoyance. "Your Honor," Hayes boomed, his voice oozing disdain. "The defendant is clearly attempting to derail these proceedings with irrelevant, fabricated, sentimental nonsense. This is a court of law, not a therapy session for his troubled childhood." He turned to the jury, his expression contemptuous. His theatrical outburst is merely a desperate ploy to distract from the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Prosecutor Hayes's subsequent actions intensified his role as the antagonist, driven by a desire to secure a high-profile conviction and undermine Judge Thorne. He had a long-standing, unspoken rivalry with Judge Thorne, viewing him as an old-guard obstacle to his own ambitious career trajectory. Hayes perceived Judge Thorne's unusual interest in Ethan as a sign of weakness, a potential lapse in impartiality that could be exploited. He began a subtle campaign to discredit Judge Thorne, leaking carefully twisted information to sympathetic media outlets, hinting at unusual judicial interest in the case, suggesting that Judge Thorne was becoming soft on crime or losing his edge. He insinuated that the judge's focus on Ethan's background was a frivolous waste of taxpayer money, all designed to ensure that public pressure would demand a maximum sentence, regardless of any underlying truths. Hayes was tightening the noose, utterly oblivious to the profound familial connection that was slowly unraveling before his very eyes, unknowingly pushing Judge Thorne towards a devastating personal and professional crucible. The glare of the courtroom lights seemed to amplify the oppressive weight bearing down on Judge Alistair Thorne. The trial of Ethan Vance had reached its critical, climactic phase, the sentencing hearing. The air was thick with expectation, a palpable tension woven from public outrage, media scrutiny, and the formidable presence of prosecutor Richard Hayes. The pressure on Judge Thorne was immense. Boston's newspapers, fueled by Hayes's subtle leaks and the public's thirst for retribution, clamored for a harsh deterrent, a maximum sentence that would send an unequivocal message to the city's burgeoning youth crime wave. Ethan Vance, defiant but visibly shaken, stood before the bench, his fate hanging by the thinnest of threads. All evidence pointed to a long, unforgiving prison term. The courtroom, with its imposing oak benches, its stern American flag, and the raised dais of the judge's bench, transformed into a stark arena. This was more than just a place of legal proceedings. It was a crucible for Judge Thorne's conscience. It was here, within these very walls, that he had forged his reputation as an unyielding dispenser of justice. And now, it was here that his deepest principles, his personal grief, and an agonizing unspoken suspicion would be put to the ultimate test. The rigid adherence to the law, which had been his solace and his shield, now felt like a heavy burden. threatening to crush the fragile bud of a new, terrifying truth. As the arguments for sentencing unfolded, Judge Thorne felt an almost unbearable sense of solitude. Prosecutor Hayes, a relentless orator, painted a vivid picture of Ethan Vance as a dangerous, incorrigible menace, deserving of nothing less than the severest punishment. He presented a meticulously constructed narrative of a young life spiraling into criminality, devoid of remorse or hope for rehabilitation. The defense, led by Sarah Miller, offered impassioned pleas for leniency, citing Ethan's tragic past and the systemic failures that had led him astray. But the weight of evidence, the public pressure, and Hayes's aggressive rhetoric seemed insurmountable. Judge Thorne sat on the bench, outwardly impassive, but inwardly a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The logical part of his mind, the seasoned jurist, recognized the irrefutable facts Ethan Vance was guilty, and the law, as it stood, demanded a harsh penalty. But the other part of him, the part awakened by Ethan's defiant gaze and his raw outburst about the locket and the orphanage, screamed a different truth. He clutched his old pocket watch in his robe pocket, its cool metal a tangible link to his lost daughter, to the missing pieces of his life. He looked at Ethan, then at Sarah Miller, a silent plea in his eyes for more, for something, anything, that could connect the dots, confirm his horrifying, beautiful suspicion. But Sarah, though believing in Ethan's innocence, had reached the limits of her own investigation. She had no definitive proof, no new evidence that could sway the unyielding scales of justice. Judge Thorne was utterly alone in his nascent, terrifying belief, a solitary figure navigating a moral and familial labyrinth. Time pressure descended with agonizing precision. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked loudly, each second amplifying the tension. Judge Thorne knew the standard procedures, the expected timeline. He had only minutes left before he would have to deliver his sentence. The bailiff stood ready. The courtroom staff shifted nervously. Prosecutor Hayes sat, a smug, expectant look on his face, anticipating his victory. The public gallery, packed with concerned citizens and hungry reporters, buzzed with hushed anticipation. They wanted justice, swift and uncompromising. His gaze flickered from Ethan to the empty seat where his daughter Amelia should have sat, then to the closed door of the jury room. He remembered Amelia's sketch of a child's face, the haunting familiarity of Ethan's features. He recalled her visits to St. Jude's. The pieces were there, scattered, tantalizingly close, but without irrefutable proof. They were merely conjecture, unworthy of a court of law. To delay, to ask for a recess based on a hunch, would invite ridicule, accusations of bias, and undoubtedly play right into Prosecutor Hayes's hands, allowing him to further discredit the judge's impartiality. His career, his reputation for unwavering justice, would be irrevocably tarnished. But to proceed, to deliver the maximum sentence to a young man who might be his own flesh and blood, a consequence of a betrayal he had yet to fully comprehend, was an unbearable thought. It would be a profound personal tragedy, a compounding of his decades-old grief. He felt the immense weight of the gavel in his hand, a symbol of absolute power, but also of absolute, terrible responsibility. He had to act. He had to make a move, a desperate gamble, to uncover the truth before it was too late. He raised his eyes, fixing his gaze on the silent, expectant faces before him, searching for a sign, any sign, that could lead him to the truth. The courtroom held its breath, awaiting his final, life-altering pronouncement. The silence in the courtroom was a living, breathing entity, thick with the weight of expectation. Judge Elias Thorne's hand hovered above the gavel, a symbol of absolute power, yet now feeling impossibly heavy, burdened by an unspoken truth. The clock on the wall, relentless and unforgiving, ticked down the final seconds before he was compelled to deliver the maximum sentence to Ethan Vance, a young man whom his gut, his very soul, now screamed was his own flesh and blood. Prosecutor Richard Hayes watched, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips, confident of his impending victory. Then, just as the final second was about to click, and the judge's gavel began its slow, inevitable descent, a subtle commotion rippled through the courtroom doors. A bailiff swiftly approached the bench, a plain white envelope clutched in his hand. He handed it to Judge Thorne, whispering urgently. The envelope bore no official seal, no discernible markings, only the faint imprint of a hasty handwriting. It was from Sarah Miller, Ethan's public defender, who had, in the agonizing hours leading up to the sentencing, pursued a desperate, last-minute lead, acting on Judge Thorne's earlier unspoken suggestion of a DNA test. Judge Thorne, his brow furrowed in a slight frown, opened the envelope. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical, widened almost imperceptibly as they scanned the contents. The color drained from his face, leaving it a stark, ashen white. He read the document once, then a second time, his gaze fixed on a single, damning line. He looked up, his eyes, now filled with a profound shock and an unbearable agony, locked onto Ethan Vance in the defendant's chair. Then, with a chilling intensity that cut through the silence, his gaze shifted to Prosecutor Hayes, a silent accusation burning in their depths. This was the bated breath moment, a suspended reality. Judge Thorne did not bring down the gavel. He did not speak. He simply sat there, utterly motionless, the white paper clutched in his trembling hand, his face a canvas of disbelief and crushing grief. The courtroom, sensing the profound shift, held its collective breath. Prosecutor Hayes's confident smirk faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and then irritation. He started to protest. "Your Honor, the time." But his voice died in his throat as Judge Thorne's unwavering accusatory stare silenced him. The atmosphere, already tense, thickened to an almost unbearable density. Every single person in that courtroom, from the jury to the public gallery, felt the monumental shift, the agonizing pause before an unimaginable truth would be laid bare. Then, Judge Thorne, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper, yet resonating with an undeniable power, broke the silence. "Bailiff," he commanded, his eyes still fixed on the stunned faces. "Clear the courtroom, all present, except for counsel, the defendant, and myself." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the baffled faces of the jury and the media. "This court requires an immediate, unscheduled private conference." The order, unprecedented in its abruptness and the gravity of its tone, sent a ripple of bewildered murmurs through the gallery. Behind the closed doors of the judge's chambers, in a room now thick with palpable tension, Judge Thorne looked at Sarah Miller, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible understanding. He then slammed the DNA test result down on the polished mahogany table, its stark white paper a beacon of truth. He pointed a trembling finger at the conclusive line. This cannot be," he whispered, his voice raw with pain. Sarah Miller, her face pale but resolute, met his gaze. "Your Honor," she said, her voice filled with a quiet triumph mixed with profound sorrow. "The results are irrefutable. We ran the samples from St. Jude's Orphanage, linked to a missing child's file from 20 years ago, to your own. The probability of paternal lineage is 99.9999%. She then carefully placed a faded, tattered baby blanket and a small, broken silver locket, identical to the one Ethan had described, on the table beside the DNA report. These were found with Ethan Vance when he was left at the orphanage. The locket has the initials AVT inside. Judge Thorne's eyes, filled with dawning horror and an agonizing, profound recognition, locked onto the locket. His hand instinctively went to his own pocket, closing around his treasured pocket watch. AVT, the initials of his lost daughter, Amelia Vance Thorne. The date, the memory of Amelia's own missing locket. He looked at Ethan, who sat stone-faced, bewildered by the sudden turn of events. and then to the sketch of a child's face in Amelia's old journal, which he had brought with him. It was Ethan, his grandson, the defiant young man before him, whom he had been seconds away from condemning to a life behind bars, was his own flesh and blood, the lost legacy of his daughter. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave of grief, regret, and a terrifying, dawning understanding of a decades-long betrayal. The reactions of the witnesses to this profound revelation were absolute. Prosecutor Hayes, who had witnessed the exchange with growing horror, stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. His jaw dropped, his eyes wide with a combination of disbelief, rage at being thwarted, and a chilling realization of the monumental personal and professional implications. The carefully constructed case, his public triumph, had just imploded, revealing a personal tragedy of epic proportions. His smugness dissolved into a look of profound, sickening dread. He, the Type A antagonist, had inadvertently forced a judge to condemn his own grandson, and the truth of that action would shatter his career. When the courtroom doors finally reopened, a sense of electric anticipation hung in the air. Judge Thorne reappeared on the bench, his face still pale but now etched with a profound, almost terrifying composure. He looked directly at the packed public gallery, his gaze sweeping over the eager faces of the media. His voice, when he spoke, was low, resonant, and carried an undeniable weight of authority, yet infused with a raw, controlled emotion that vibrated through every listener. "This court," Judge Thorne announced, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction, "will not be delivering a sentence at this time. Instead, a motion has been presented, and evidence brought forth that fundamentally changes the nature of this case. New, compelling evidence has come to light that indicates a profound and deeply disturbing familial connection between the defendant, Ethan Vance, and my own family." He paused, letting the murmurs ripple through the room. "Specifically, a conclusive DNA test has revealed that Ethan Vance is my grandson, the son of my deceased daughter, Amelia Vance Thorne." The announcement struck the courtroom like a physical blow. A collective, audible gasp ripped through the room. The public gallery erupted in a cacophony of stunned murmurs, then gasps of disbelief, followed by a surge of overwhelming, sympathetic awe. Reporters scrambled for their phones, their faces a mixture of shock and fervent excitement. From skepticism and cynical anticipation, their faces transformed into expressions of profound wonder. And, finally, a collective surging wave of empathetic anguish for the judge, and a dawning, terrible understanding of the profound tragedy that had just unfolded. The truth was fully revealed. Judge Thorne continued, his voice gaining strength, his gaze now fixed on Prosecutor Hayes, a silent challenge in his eyes. Furthermore, the circumstances of his abandonment and the subsequent lack of investigation into his identity, despite his mother's well-known tragic demise, suggest a possible conspiracy or malicious intent that pushed this young man into a life of vulnerability and, ultimately, crime. Justice, ladies and gentlemen, is not merely about punishment. It is about truth. It is about accountability. And it is about healing. He then delivered a shocking, unprecedented order. Therefore, I am not only postponing this sentencing indefinitely, but I am formally ordering a full, comprehensive, and immediate reinvestigation into the death of Amelia Vance Thorne and the circumstances of Ethan Vance's abandonment, with all past records to be unsealed and re-examined. I will also be requesting a full inquiry into the past conduct of certain individuals involved in the initial investigation and prosecution of this case. His words hung in the air, a devastating promise of justice, and a chilling threat of exposure for those who had wronged his family. The sudden, seismic tremor unleashed in Judge Thorne's courtroom sent shockwaves rippling far beyond the hallowed halls of justice. The news of Ethan Vance being the judge's long-lost grandson, coupled with the immediate order for a reinvestigation into Amelia Thorne's death and Ethan's abandonment, became a national sensation. It was a story of profound personal tragedy colliding with a systemic failure of justice, dominating every news cycle and captivating the public imagination. The rigid facade of the legal system, accustomed to its predictable rhythms, found itself in an unprecedented, deeply unsettling upheaval. The swift downfall of prosecutor Richard Hayes, the Type A antagonist, was immediate and absolute, a direct consequence of his public defeat and ethical compromises. The reinvestigation, now under intense public scrutiny and spearheaded by an independent special prosecutor, swiftly uncovered a disturbing pattern of Hayes's past conduct. His relentless pursuit of high conviction rates, his aggressive tactics, and his willingness to suppress or dismiss potentially exculpatory evidence, including a faint, dismissed lead about Amelia Thorne's volatile financial affairs and a possible connection to organized crime that had been in the initial police reports, came under intense scrutiny. It became clear that Hayes had not only overlooked but actively marginalized information that could have altered Ethan's fate and uncovered deeper truths. He was immediately stripped of his prosecutorial duties, his once stellar career incinerated by the very flames of justice he had sought to manipulate. Facing multiple counts of obstruction of justice and official misconduct, he was disbarred and ultimately faced a lengthy prison sentence, his name becoming synonymous with ambition unchecked by ethics. His fate was precisely commensurate with his crimes. He had used the law as a weapon for personal gain, and now the law, in its most righteous form, turned against him. In the harrowing weeks that followed the revelations, as the new investigations began to unravel a decades-old conspiracy, Hayes's former colleagues and political allies deserted him. He found himself utterly isolated, his power and influence dissolving like mist. He was left with nothing but the crushing weight of his monumental errors and the bitter irony of his own downfall, a man consumed by the very system he had so ruthlessly exploited. For others in the legal community, those who had quietly admired Hayes's ambition or accepted his aggressive tactics as necessary, the courtroom drama prompted a profound reckoning and a genuine shift in perspective. Several prominent judges and senior prosecutors, who had initially doubted Judge Thorne's emotional outburst or questioned his impartiality, now approached him with visible humility and heartfelt apologies. Judge Harrison, a stern colleague who had once viewed Thorne's methods as overly traditional, sought him out. "Elias," he said, his voice unusually soft, "I was wrong, terribly wrong. We were all so focused on the statistics, the convictions. We lost sight of the human element. You have reminded us what true justice is, and the profound cost of forgetting." Other court officials, and even some of the initial police officers on Amelia's case, came forward, offering their support and expressing their remorse for not digging deeper years ago. This genuine repentance from the misled individuals underscored the moral victory Judge Thorne had achieved, proving that humility could blossom even within the rigid structures of the law. For Judge Thorne, the immediate aftermath brought an extraordinary, well-deserved new opportunity, but more profoundly, a personal rebirth. The DNA revelation, the vindication of his gut feeling, had fundamentally transformed him. He didn't just regain his reputation, he transcended it. The public, witnessing his raw vulnerability and his unwavering pursuit of truth, now revered him not just as a fair judge, but as a compassionate human being, a symbol of hope and redemption within the legal system. He was reinstated to the bench with overwhelming public support, and offered a new, deeply meaningful role, head of the newly established Juvenile Justice Reform Committee, a special judicial panel dedicated to overhauling the system for young offenders, focusing on rehabilitation and addressing root causes rather than punitive measures. This was far more than a job. It was a profound recognition of his newfound purpose, a chance to infuse the legal system with the empathy and restorative justice he had so painfully rediscovered. He accepted, but with a singular, unwavering condition: every case must be viewed through a holistic lens, taking into account systemic factors and offering paths to redemption, not just punishment. In the tumultuous days that followed, amidst the whirlwind of renewed investigations and public scrutiny, Judge Thorne found moments of profound contemplative conversation with Sarah Miller, Ethan's public defender. Their offices, once separated by an adversarial divide, now became a shared space for collaboration. Your Honor. Sarah began one quiet afternoon, her face still etched with the exhaustion of the past weeks, but glowing with a fierce determination. What you did, it was remarkable. You risked everything, your career, your reputation, for a hunch. Judge Thorne, now more often called simply Elias, offered a rare, gentle smile. He picked up his old pocket watch, its smooth surface a comfort in his hand. It wasn't just a hunch, Sarah. It was a scream from my soul, a voice I'd silenced for too long. My daughter, her loss. It taught me the law's limitations. I thought rigidity was strength, but true strength, I'm learning, is about empathy. It's about seeking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and understanding the human story behind the cold facts. He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. You were instrumental, Sarah. You believed in Ethan when no one else would. You followed that desperate lead. You were the only one who truly helped me. Sarah nodded, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. I believed in him. Yes, but I also believed in you, Judge Thorne. I saw your integrity, even when you tried to hide it. I knew you were searching for something more. Their conversations, stretching into the late hours, were a mixture of legal strategy for the ongoing investigations, philosophical discussions on justice reform, and personal reflections on the pain of loss and the power of redemption. Elias shared the agonizing details of Amelia's disappearance, the fragmented memories of his lost grandson, and the decades of guilt and suppressed grief. Sarah, in turn, confided her own struggles with the often callous nature of the justice system and her unwavering belief in the inherent good of even the most marginalized individuals. Their shared commitment to ethical justice, now amplified by their personal connection, forged a deep, unbreakable bond of friendship and mutual respect. The new calm wasn't merely the absence of conflict, it was the quiet, profound peace of a fragmented family beginning to heal, a broken system beginning to mend, all under the guiding hand of a judge who had finally found his truest purpose. 5 years later, the venerable chambers of justice in Boston no longer echoed solely with the rigid pronouncements of the law. They vibrated with a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to redemption and rehabilitation that was championed by a man who had profoundly redefined what it meant to seek justice. Judge Alistair Thorne, having gracefully retired from the bench, remained a towering figure in legal reform, a living testament to the transformative power of empathy and second chances. His grand Boston home, once a silent monument to his grief, was now a vibrant center of family life. Elias was no longer a solitary figure. He was a beloved grandfather, a patient mentor, and a beacon of hope. His relationship with Ethan Vance, his long-lost grandson, had blossomed into a bond of unbreakable strength. Ethan, having successfully completed a restorative justice program and a rigorous academic curriculum, had not only turned his life around, but had found his true calling. He was now a passionate advocate for youth justice, working tirelessly with at-risk teenagers in Boston's inner-city neighborhoods, sharing his own story not as a cautionary tale, but as a powerful narrative of resilience and the profound impact of a single act of compassion. He even pursued a law degree, inspired by his grandfather's unwavering pursuit of truth, aiming to become a public defender himself, dedicated to those who society had forgotten. Elias had found profound peace and genuine happiness, not in the cold pursuit of legal victory, but in the warmth of familial love and the tangible impact of his new mission. The empty spaces in his life had been filled, not with professional accolades, but with the laughter of his grandson, the quiet pride in Ethan's growth, and the shared purpose of building a more equitable world. True to their shared commitment to paying it forward, Elias and Ethan co-founded the Unconditional Justice Foundation, This ambitious nonprofit organization focused on providing holistic support for young offenders and at-risk youth, particularly those ensnared by the systemic failures of the justice system. The foundation offered comprehensive legal aid, educational scholarships, vocational training, and critical mental health counseling. It established mentorship programs, pairing experienced legal professionals and reformed individuals with young people navigating the complexities of the legal system, offering them not just legal defense, but genuine guidance and a path to reintegration. Elias regularly visited juvenile detention centers and community centers, sharing his own story with incarcerated youth. He spoke openly about his initial rigid judgments, his profound personal loss, and the startling discovery that transformed his life. His message was simple, yet powerful. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and the fundamental belief in an individual's capacity for change. Sarah Miller, Ethan's former public defender, now a distinguished partner in a leading Boston law firm, remained a steadfast ally and a close friend to both Elias and Ethan. She served on the board of the Unconditional Justice Foundation, her sharp legal mind and passionate advocacy instrumental in shaping its groundbreaking initiatives. She often collaborated with Elias on policy reform, pushing for legislative changes that prioritized rehabilitation and systemic equity. Their professional partnership had evolved into a deep, mutual respect, rooted in their shared dedication to a more compassionate legal system. The story culminates in a powerful, iconic final image. It's a bright, sun-drenched afternoon in a vibrant Boston City park. Alistair Thorne, his silver hair catching the light, sits on a park bench, a gentle smile gracing his lips. Beside him sits Ethan Vance, now a confident and compassionate young man, holding his own toddler son on his lap. The child, Julian, named in silent honor of the boy whose story brought them together, giggles as he plays with a small, wooden toy. Elias reaches into his pocket and pulls out his old, familiar pocket watch. Its tarnished silver gleams softly in the sunlight. He slowly opens it, revealing the faint inscription, A.V. T. September 12th, 1999. His eyes, filled with a profound warmth, gaze from the watch to Ethan, then to the joyful child playing beside them. The image is a poignant symphony of time, loss, healing, and continuity. The watch, a symbol of a shattered past, now represents a lineage unbroken, a future reclaimed. It signifies that true justice extends beyond courtrooms and verdicts. It blossoms in forgiveness, in connection, and in the enduring power of a second chance, illuminating a path toward a brighter, more compassionate future for generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.